retirement accounts. What are they? At their core, retirement accounts are accounts that can be utilized by ordinary individual investors in order to receive tax benefits that they would have otherwise not received if they invested elsewhere. Now, what types of retirement accounts are there? Well, there are sponsored retirement plans. In this video, we'll cover the 401k, but there's a lot of other accounts besides the 401k that are also included under the sponsored retirement plans category. And number two, there are IRAs. And IRAs stand for individual retirement accounts. Now, each of these accounts, the sponsored retirement plans and the IRA, can receive tax benefits through one of two ways, either the traditional or the Roth. And we'll cover these shortly. Or to learn about these retirement accounts, we first have to understand what is a contribution. Contributions are basically sums that are invested in this account or any of these accounts from the account holder or employee's income. And this portion may include the employer match, but for now, there's a lot of measurements or a lot of limits set out by the IRS, which really just focus on the sums invested from the employee or account holder's income, which we'll focus on the next slide. Now, what is an IRA? Individual retirement accounts can be opened up by anyone who makes ordinary income. And this basically means that it just has to be income that's taxed at the ordinary income tax rate. And that's it. Now, the main appeal about IRAs is that there's a lot less restrictions on what can be invested. So you can invest in a lot of individual stocks or mutual funds if you invest through the IRA, in contrast to a lot of investment restrictions if you invested through a 401k. Now, as mentioned before, there are Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs, and both of these accounts can be opened up by any single individual. Now, as I referred to earlier, contributions also have a cap, and this exists for all types of retirement accounts. But this cap only concerns the amounts that are invested from the employee's income. That's it. Now, this account has an annual contribution cap of $6,000 per year. And this limit will jump up to $7,000 for individuals that are 50 years old or older through the catch-up phase. And the catch-up phase basically just helps older individuals accumulate more savings before retirement. Now, when I refer to this contribution cap of $6,000, let's say you're an account holder at 30 years old. This $6,000 is just the total amount of contributions they can commit to both the Roth and the traditional. So if you wanted, in any year, you could put $3,000 right here in the Roth, and you can put $3,000 in the traditional. So you can put up any ratio that you want as long as the amount does not is not greater than $6,000. So this is basically, so it has to be less than or equal to $6,000. It cannot cross over this limit unless you're 50 years old or older, which that limit would jump up to $7,000. Now, what I mentioned here is that, which we'll cover shortly, which is the 401k. In this case, let's take an example of an account holder called Phil. And Phil works for a company. However, if Phil opens up an IRA, his company has nothing to do with it. So although Phil's ordinary income comes from the salary at his company has no involvement of any decisions or whatever Phil wants to do. Whatever Phil wants to do, he can do. And the last main thing we want to consider about IRAs is that for the Roth IRA, if the account holder's adjusted gross income exceeds a certain amount, then any contributions are essentially prohibited as long as that income remains above that threshold. And we aren't going to go into specifics into it today, but we'll cover it in a future video. Now, introducing 401ks, my bad. So, they are a type of sponsored retirement plans. And what these sponsored retirement plans essentially mean is that an individual can get a 401k only if they are an employee at a company that already offers one. Now, the big discouraging factor about 401ks is that there's usually a lot of restrictions on what can be invested in. So usually there's only certain types of mutual funds that the account holder employee can invest in. And usually the only type of individual stock that's available for investment is the company itself. And that's not a lot of diversification. And now, as the same for the IRA, there's also Roth 401ks and traditional 401ks. And the annual contribution cap for 2020, and this, like the IRA, only comprises of the sums invested from the employee's income, essentially equals to $19,500 for 2020. And as similar to the catch-up phase, this limit will increase to $26,000 for individuals 50 years old and older. So this is the annual contribution cap. Now, what is the main appeal about 401ks? Well, the main appeal about these types of sponsored retirement plans that right here about 401k, there may be something called an employer contribution, which is a type of retirement benefit for employees. And this means that if any employee contributes a certain amount that exceeds a threshold within any given year, the employer will also agree to contribute an additional amount towards retirement along with the employee's contribution up to a predefined limit. And we'll make an example which we'll cover shortly, or maybe in a future video. Now, this right here, the plan administrator. This represents the sponsor and the sponsored retirement plans. And this is the reason why there's a lot of restrictions on investment. So the company that Phil works for will hire and pay a third-party plan administrator, and their task is to manage all the employee retirement activities on this company's behalf. And the investment selections that are available to the employees of this company really are decided by the amount that the company decides to pay the administrator, which means that if the company that Phil works for pays the administrator more, there'll be more investment selections available for Phil. Now, something that's very, very important to note is that if you open up a 401k at an employer, the only way you can withdraw from that account is once you leave that company. Otherwise, if you're still working for that company, the only way you can access those funds is if you borrow against your account balance through a 401k loan, which we'll not cover today, but we will probably cover in a future video. Now, as we mentioned before, these are some other sponsored retirement plans besides the 401k. There's a SEP 401k, which is available for owners of small businesses. There's a 403b, which is often given to employees of nonprofits or educational institutions. So this may concern a lot of teachers. And there's also a 457b, and this is offered to employees of state and local governments. And this may also include certain other types of nonprofits. But for this video, we're only going to cover the 401k. Now, something that we must clarify about the 401k contribution. So there's another IRS limit on contribution cap, and it's called the maximum annual additions. And this amount is very simple. It just takes the amount that the employee contributes and it adds together the any matches that are made by the employer. And for 2020, the IRS has basically said, okay, if I take all the money that you contribute to your account and I take all the money that your employer contributes to your account along with yours, that total sum cannot exceed $57,000. Now, something else that's very important is that the employee's contributions, they have to be determined before the calendar year. And it's so that whenever the employee receives the paycheck from the employer will know what percentage of the paycheck to put into the 401k. So this is the big thing. Since the 401k, the only way you can open it is if you work at a company. The way you contribute through it is through your paychecks. And you have to decide what percentage of your paycheck you want to contribute to the 401k beforehand, because the employer will basically automatically do it for you. And throughout the year, something that's very important to note is that it cannot be changed. This percentage cannot be changed unless there's certain types of exceptions, such as certain types of personal emergencies for the employee. Now, something that we also want to talk about are employer matches. And employer matches are also made throughout the year alongside every contribution of the employee through their paycheck. And that's basically it. And something that we want to cover are certain types of employer matches. Now, employer matches, as I mentioned before, are investments that are made by the employer if the employee already contributes beyond a predefined threshold set by the employer. And the investments made with these employer matches will match proportionally the investments made by the employee him or herself. Now, this sum is held in a separate account that operates like a traditional 401k. And if there's a vesting plan, this employer match will remain inaccessible to them. Now, what is a vesting plan? Essentially, since these employer matches are contributions that the employee doesn't even make from his or her own income, they're really a big type of benefit. And in order to discourage these employees from leaving the company, some employers will put in a type of vesting plan. Well, they require all employees to stay at the company for a certain length of time before 100% of all the employer's contributions can be realized by the employee. Now, there's two different types. Number one is cliff. Now, cliff means that it remains 0% vested for a for a predefined period of time, and once the employee has stayed at the company beyond this time period, they automatically get 100% of the employer's contributions, which means that if they leave the company after they get 100% vested, it means that the employer has no right to take it back. And the employee can leave the company and he or her can withdraw it for him or herself. Now, the second part is graded, which means that vesting, the percentage of vesting, will increase in incremental amounts every single year until it reaches 100%. Now, let's go through an example. Let's assume there's an employer match of 10%. So let's take that same employee again, Phil. So from his point of perspective, if he contributes at the bare minimum 10% of his gross paycheck, and this percentage is determined before the calendar year as I described earlier, he has the right to receive a dollar per dollar match by the company up to that same 10% of the base of his gross income. Therefore, the addition can be seen as a return on the amount contributed. So let's say if Phil actually follows through this plan and contributes 10% of his paycheck, he's basically locked in an immediate 100% on the dollar amount that he has contributed. So the action of simply placing his paycheck in the account can trigger this employer match. But the thing is that if he decides to contribute a certain percentage above this 10%, that amount wouldn't be matched dollar per dollar or wouldn't be matched at all by the company. But that's really the amazing feature about the main appeal about 401ks is that you can put in your own money, but then you can immediately lock in return using the company's contribution, because that's basically free money that you wouldn't have before. And just basically, if you simply just are able to contribute a certain amount to your account, then you have the right to receive that employer contribution. And once you get a 100% vested, you can leave anytime that you want, and you still have rights to withdraw those amounts for yourself. Now, this video has covered basically the basics of 401ks, IRAs, and in the future, we'll cover the two different types of tax advantages, the Roth and the traditional. Thank you.